After a 6-month break, we are finally continuing with the LEGO Pirate World. Last time we built the island and even showcased it at an exhibition together with this impressive pirate ship two friends of mine built. And now, after way too long of a break, we can finally continue and tackle that gap in the back right there. And for that, we start off with the cliff for the mainland, where the fortress will be placed on top. We haven't included any transitions for the water this time, as this is a steep coast, so it doesn't really make any sense to indicate shallow water like we did it on the other island. The only thing we did is add some individual waves that roll towards the coast. The rest is once again then simply covered up with these trans light blue tiles. Now we're already getting to the first details. First, I used a small lasso, making the loop tighter so that it now fits on the pin that then holds up the minifigure head. You can already probably guess what I'm going for. This is now anchored underneath this rocky outcrop, and of course this entire scene is heavily inspired by Pirates of the Caribbean, where skeletons are hung up outside underneath the rocks to scare off pirates. We've however also built some more peaceful scenes, like a seagull nesting on a nearby rock right there. But for now, I'd say let's move on to the details on the backside. And now you might wonder how exactly we are going to create details right there, because that's normally simply a clean wall. What we're now going to do is build small scenes in cross sections of the mainland. For example, here's a tunnel or a sort of mine being dug by the pirates, aiming to reach the cave on the other side, which will eventually be the fortress's treasure chamber. And for the treasure chamber itself, we've of course added tons of details, like a bust, the treasure chest in the middle, which is probably even going to be illuminated with LEDs. And also, I'll show you how everything is connected to the top and the rest of the fortress in just a second. Around the corner, we have the next cave or chamber, and we're continuing with my personal favorite cellar section. These stacked barrels, most likely representing a wine cellar or maybe rum storage, whatever was realistic back in the days. And then in the middle we have a table with a few bottles resting on top. However, I'm most likely going to replace them with green glass for realism. A door closes off the room and leads to the staircase, connecting everything with the fortress once again. There's also currently a guy sampling bottles, and then I added this column in front to make everything a bit cozier and more hidden. Here you can see the mentioned staircase. You can also see it disappearing down there, and then on top it simply comes out. This part is completely modular, eventually being connected with a building that's part of the fortress. To the right of the wine cellar, there's a hallway with a small dungeon with skeletons who played cards until they died. Just a little humorous scene right there. And next to it, we added a bench in the background that can even be lifted up, although, well, I know this is a bit unnecessary. After having completed all the cross sections and caves, it was time to continue building on top of the mainland. For that, I was building it as modular as possible, because in future we're going to light everything up, and therefore this is always quite important. And then it was time to test how everything looks back there, where we at this point still had the gap remaining. So I quickly added the new modules and also worked on the surface structure to prepare all the spaces for the buildings, defensive structures, and so on. And to now show you how we built the fortress, let's start with the most important part, the main gate. This now immediately also sets the style for the rest of the entire fortress, with this arch over the entrance, because everything is built very softly and rounded, in contrast to the quite rough cliff face. The main gate, of course, also needs to be guarded and has an imperial flag hoisted on top, which now leads me to my favorite feature of the gate, because the emblem of the flag we now recreated in brick form with these two crossed cannons to show what type of fortress this is. The walls we built now lead to the first defensive tower, which is also completely round. The building technique in this one is absolutely insane, but on the other side it must be noted that there isn't really much room for an interior, so we sort of cheated a little bit, making it look from the outside like there was an interior with a minifigure peeking out, even though it was impossible to add a real interior. We used rounded off battlements once again on top, and then did the exact same for the second tower. And now these two towers are connected with Technic connectors to ensure that they actually hold on top of the cliff. And then in between this wall piece right there took us 4 hours to build, but afterwards you can always reward yourself with the detail work. For example, right there we decided to add a seagull that is shooed away by a soldier because it was bothering him from defending the fortress. Just little fun details. We then continue with the next wall sections, another 3 hours of work right there, which then connects the tower with the next building, which in this case also serves as part of the outer wall, and therefore is quite an important building as well on the corner, housing the captain's office filled with all sorts of letters stacked on his desk, and therefore he's also, as you can see, quite unhappy. The upper floor of the building is removable, now revealing a trapdoor. As soon as we open this trapdoor, you can see the beginning of a staircase leading down to the treasure chamber I was also talking about earlier in this video. Next is a small wall section that connects this building with another outer building, therefore also the thicker walls for stability. Since this is an outer building, it is also used as a defensive structure, including a watchtower with cannons, and roof once again is built in the exact same style as the adjacent building, because that always is important to have this homogeneous look for the entire fortress. And inside the rest of the building is a bit of a quieter space with a smaller living room right there. With the entire outer section of the fortress now finished, we can focus on the interior. And this part is now so satisfying. Just take a look at how perfectly this angled wall piece right there fits into the cut plates. And I tell you, as soon as we finished this part of the interior, we had to remove and place this part of the wall back into the fortress multiple times because it was so satisfying. On top, then our cannons as another line of defense within the fortress. We also added some greenery and the first palm tree right there, just a touch of green. We were quite careful in this case not to overdo it because we still have so much vegetation on the outside, and therefore this is important for the overall contrast. Here you can see the first soldiers being lined up, although someone is missing who is currently running towards the rest of the crew because he overslept and is a bit too late. Connecting to the spiral staircase, we now add the church inside the fortress. The interior, although isn't very exciting, I honestly didn't want to waste any minifigures inside because, well, in the end, they simply aren't visible. The interesting part is the upper section of the church, because in this case I added a dome instead of the usual spire, fitting the colonial style. And also I recently developed this working bell for my other church in the Lego City, and therefore I honestly had to reuse this mechanism once again inside the fortress. Behind the church we decided to add a small cemetery that also works quite well color-wise because it once again adds a bit of contrast, although we might refine it with some cut plates to give it a bit of a softer look. This part is once again fenced off simply to highlight the different areas within the fortress. And then on the other side of the church, some soldiers are currently having a break, enjoying a few bottles of rum, and one soldier even passed out, created by using a modified brick with a stud, and then the head is simply placed on top, simulating a sleeping minifigure. Bit of cheating building technique wise right there. In the alley between the church and the other buildings, 3 chained pirates are being led down to the dungeon where the card playing skeletons are, if you remember that from earlier from this episode. And then we're nearly finished with the interior at this point. I only needed to add a touch of greenery on the inside, but not overdoing it at all, as I said earlier, because of the contrast towards the rest of the vegetation on the outside of the fortress. The outside of the fortress is now also where we're going to continue with the greenery. First of all, with a new building technique I developed for palm trees. I always had issues with the palm trees disconnecting and falling out of place once again, so I now decided to add bars to the inside, which then can be placed inside a brick modified because they have these hollow studs. And now this is hopefully the one and only building techniques, so these palm trees finally stay in place and don't constantly fall off. The rest of the transition between the cliff and the wall is simply covered up with a few more of these bamboo leaves and then 2 more palm trees. Not too much greenery on the outside because we want to have the facade also visible of the fortress and not completely hide it behind palm trees. And now this is the very first time you can get a look of these 4 modules we've now finally completed. Highly detailed, but at the same time the overall picture isn't overcrowded, which is always the most important part. This module right there, now placing everything back into place to the rest of the MOC, weighs about 10 kilos by now, I think. This is extremely heavy, of course, also with the caves we've added on the backside of the modules, which, as you might notice right now, can't be seen in this current position of the pirate MOC. Therefore, I'm going to extend the entire MOC quadruple it in size and then move it to another place in future. Therefore, we've also prepared these little cutouts with the caves that obviously at the moment can't be seen. But this project is going to be so much bigger, I don't think you have any idea. Now quickly adding the walls back in place and these two last remaining empty base plates in this area right there. This is what everything now looks like. And talking about the space issues we have, well, as you can see right there at the moment, this is the only way I can reach the pirate MOC from the other side. I have to climb up on this railing of the staircase, and this of course isn't at all a long-term solution. So you're going to understand that I'm going to replace the pirate MOC to a completely different spot in future. And now in order for you to get an idea of how the pirate MOC is going to be continued, I've now roughly sketched out the future plans of the pirate world. We have a harbor right there. Then this up there in the corner is the fortress we built today. We may even launch an attack with the pirate ship onto the fortress, and then this is going to be the next project, a massive Lego volcano, maybe even with real smoke added to it. This is something I'm currently working on. And then of course tons of water base plates I still need to build with the other guys, and of course still more room for maybe even more different little islands and ships and so on. Now one major thing is still missing for today's video, of course the before and after picture. And this is now what it looks like from the start of today's video to what we've achieved after weeks of building. So with that being said, I hope you're as hyped as I am for this pirate project. The next thing, as I mentioned earlier, is most likely going to be the volcano, although this will take us some time because we still need to develop the smoke mechanism. But I think this should be one of the best projects so far. So I hope you really enjoyed today's video, and I'll see you in the next one.